here on a Saturday, so I really appreciate sort of coming along. I think we kind of want to get in a different vibe from this whole rainy, horrible thing. So we want to remember how lovely nature and wildlife is. So actually I'm going to ask, and I'm sorry I didn't organise this beforehand, but I'm going to ask, can you kick things off with Forest Song, and we'll kind of get into...
Absolutely.
So this is, Forest Song is featured in the book, obviously the book Connection with Nature. We'll sort of do a bit of a chat all about that and how it came to be in a moment. And yeah, it features some of your lyrics in the book, but of course we want to bring them to life by hearing it as a song. So get us out of this sort of dreary, rainy Saturday into a beautiful forest somewhere. That would be great.
Can you put your umbrella in the corner?
Stairway to the moon. Night captures a strange rapture. Forest fires in June. Light trickles out the windows before the hour is late. Fireflies dim and flicker and light up every movement on your face. Head buzzing like a garden, pools of dreams and signs. Oh, soft lilting, syrup evening, a trip that sails so high. Snow walker, winter cover, I know you understand. Hiding out, there's no doubt, the gentle trees will part like desert sand. Hot 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 like desert
Thank you. Can you all hear me okay?
Yeah.
Because I'm a little bit like allergic to microphones. It just makes me feel so awkward. I feel like, so this is Nick Stephenson, who just played there, that's my husband. So I kind of feel like I'm so used to the microphone being his thing. So I'm a little bit like scared to
You're
go
welcome
near it.
to it.
So yeah, so obviously we're here for Connections with Nature, which is the book that came out in October, and it's 50 Moments of Meeting the Wild. So the book is an anthology, and hopefully some of you have seen it already, or maybe you haven't. It's here. And it's 50 stories of connecting with nature. So it's an anthology of different writers, different contributors, and I guess sort of I would like to talk you through how it came about and how it came to be. And I'm really excited to be doing that here in Thetford, in Not Just Books, because I grew up in Thetford. I love Not Just Books. I love that their logo fits so perfectly with everything that we're doing, with a fox on the book cover. So it felt like the ideal place. So I'm really happy to be back here to chat about it. And we will sort of at some point be having a bit of a break. There'll be an opportunity to have some drinks and go to the toilet and whatnot. But if you do sort of need to step around, if you feel a bit uncomfortable, you want to walk, you want to grab a drink, please do. I'm not going to sort of worry too much. If sort of, let's just be comfortable and have a nice afternoon. So yeah, so Connections with Nature. So I guess the story of it, I kind of need to take you back to who I am and why I put this together and how the whole thing came about. So some people know me as Kate on Conservation. Nick Stephenson, formerly Kate Snowdon, if you grew up with me in Thetford. But I, for 10 years now, I've run the blog Kate on Conservation, and that's sort of been my long-term sort of anchor of who I am. I've kind of grown up as this Kate on Conservation figure. So where and how did all this kind of start? This is me and my mum. My mum is here. And this is us in Thetford. That is Bladen Bridge, I believe in that picture, isn't it? It's Bladen Bridge, and so we grew up in these parts. Many afternoons, weekends, etc. spent walking up and down the lovely rivers in Thetford, River Thet, River Ouse, and just sort of enjoying what Thetford had to offer. I mean, I think we're so fortunate in this space to have grown up with Thetford Forest nearby, and just had all those opportunities, like with the two rivers, with things like places like Button Island, where you can feed the geese and the swans. That for me, nature was so much a part of who I am and how I grew up. And you know, just the whole sort of rhythms and seasons of nature, I felt that you can experience on your doorstep, and certainly in Norfolk at large and in Thetford. Many afternoons and happy memories of childhood of playing in the snowdrops at Linford Park, and all the surrounding areas. So really that kind of became a trench of who I am and what I was interested in. It's always been nature, and I definitely credit that to being in Thetford and coming from Thetford. And my mum taking me out to pick the flowers and all the nice things that we've done. My sort of passion then became about speaking and talking and sharing. I say speaking, writing. I've been way more comfortable behind a computer and or back when doing notebooks and whatever than I ever have speaking. But so my interest was always writing about nature. And I feel like this is so important and relevant right now, where we're at in the world. As Sir David Attenborough said when he joined Instagram, that saving our planet is now a communications challenge. And I think we're all aware, and definitely should be, off the back of COP26 and everything that's going on in the world right now with climate change and biodiversity loss, all those things. We should now be aware that there is a problem, and we need to sort of do what we can to advocate nature. And that was obviously a major motivation of this book, is bringing together lots of different voices to advocate nature. As Sir David Attenborough says, he says it best, so why try and say it any other way? If people lose knowledge, sympathy and understanding of the natural world, they're going to mistreat it and will not ask their politicians to care for it. So for me this was, nail on the head of what it is I do as a job and as a career and as a lifestyle. So that's kind of a good place to sort of start, that I've grown up with this love, I've grown up with this passion, I'm aware of what the situation is now, and we kind of need to marry these things together. So my early influences and interests became very quickly, I was always into writing. I was always writing projects at home and stories and doing school projects and elaborately work over and above for hours and hours, sticking little things on school projects, and that writing was my tool for communication. And I found quite early on that I was quite good at writing articles for magazines and newspapers. So there's a couple kind of early examples here. This was July 2004, writing a piece. My first ever piece was about Fruitby Wildlife Gardens, and I wrote that in Suffolk, Norfolk I did some things, just put that in there for fun, for Thetford Fashion Show. It was actually like a recycled fashion show, and that was back for BBC, and that was back in 2005. So I would have actually been 14 when I did that, and 15 when I did that. So I was very much into writing and trying to get my word out there very young. I sort of knew what it was I wanted to do. And as I got a bit older, I did some stuff for the press office here. We used to have Eastern Daily Press office in Thetford, the Thetford Brandon office, and I did some work experience with them, and went on to sort of enter the Jubilee Journalism competition, which I guess would have been the Diamond Jubilee. Trying to calculate that back. They had a Jubilee Journalism competition, and I was fortunate enough to kind of win that and have some work projected up in Norwich in the Forum. So I kind of realised that was my thing I was good at, and that's what I wanted to do. Aside from that, I had this love and this passion for wildlife. So I early on became a supporter of the Born Free Foundation. So my mum again helped me out with that one. When I was about 6 or 7 years old, there was a giveaway, a sort of a token thing on the back of Andrex toilet tissues and all things. This is great. So on the back of Andrex toilet tissues, they had this thing. If you collected, I think about 8 tokens from the back of the toilet tissues, and stuck them on this piece of paper, and with a £2, it literally was with £2 coins. So you had to send in £2. 6 tokens and a piece of paper, sticking it all together, you could get an adoption for an animal with the Free Foundation. And so we did that, and my mum went and bought lots of toilet rolls before the promotion ran out. And so I encountered the Free Foundation like that. So I sent off my £2, walked up to the post box at the top of the road, and got a certificate back a couple of weeks later to say I had adopted a tiger. And I just, as a 6-year-old, I thought I had a tiger. This is really cool. I've got a tiger. I think I took it into show and tell. And now I sort of dread telling that, because now it's like I was the early tiger king or something. I was James Sussex before it was cool. So I really just fell in love with Born Free then, and sort of did as much fundraising as I could. Here in Thetford, I did things like tabletop stalls, bake sales for my school, things on the end of my road and stuff. And I raised money for the Born Free Foundation, so I kind of early sort of interactions with them. And where I always knew from being a teenager I wanted to write, I never really imagined or envisioned that I would be able to bring my love and my interest in nature and wildlife together with my love of writing. I just didn't know how that would be possible. So I sort of took it upon myself with this idea that I'm going to write. I'm going to write for magazines and websites and newspapers. I'm probably never going to get the chance to go and be around wildlife in the way that I would really like to. So when I was 18, I took a gap year. I deferred my university entrance for a year. I took a gap year volunteering out at Shamwari Game Reserve in South Africa, which is a game reserve attached to Born Free. So after all these years of actually ended up adopting lions and other, cheetahs, big cats, leopards, lions. I sort of went through all the years. I went through adopting all these different animals in their collection. And I actually got to go out and see some of them. So a couple of the lions that I'd adopted were living in a sanctuary. They'd been rescued from the zoo or from a circus, and were living out in a sanctuary in South Africa. So I went and did that, and it was incredible. And I really did think that was it, that I'd done this amazing experience. I probably won't do much to do with wildlife again. And a couple of pictures from theirs. Helping a vet with moving, translocating wild dogs, and so the lioness having an operation on her foot, I think. So really a chance to get hands-on and do that. And I fell in love with it, but I came back and I thought, that's it, I've just got to study. Actually, some of the things I did out there, so rewilding is such a well-known big term now. We hear about rewilding all the time. But before it had the name Rewilding, it's when I was out in South Africa, I was essentially doing stuff that was rewilding the land. So I guess to contextualise, when Shamwari Game Reserve used to be owned farmland, and it had been brought, but as a private game reserve, they bought up lots of land from farmers in one big block, and they were regenerating that land to be suitable for wildlife, taking away fences that had been there and everything else. So we did lots of conservation work that would now come under the banner of rewilding. So we did things like controlled burns to sort of flatten, regenerate the soil, to sort of flatten and get rid of all the stuff that's there and give it a chance to regrow. And this is quite a natural thing that happens. I mean, we obviously see now that we have wildfires and things out of control in some countries, but it's because of the effects of climate change. But it is quite natural to have land regenerated through fire. So we did sort of controlled bushfires. Getting rid of this was something pretty cool on the leaflet. So when I applied to go and I booked my place and I was ready to go as a volunteer, removing alien plant species. Alien plant species? That sounds great! But what it essentially means is non-native plants that have been planted in the area that maybe are right, or at least designed for the farms that have been there, but are actually not very good at helping the local biodiversity. So sometimes they can be competitors to plants that are supposed to be there, that are losing the chance to get the water and the nutrients that they need from the soil because these non-native ones are there, and they're actually sometimes much better equipped for. Pine trees are really good at living in places that they shouldn't and taking lots more water out of the soil than they should. So we did things like removing these alien plant species, removing aliens, and using the carcass, using the branches of and the bits that we cut down, we would use them to make what we're doing here, which is like a natural dam. It's like a type of fencing. Because a lot of what happened is to have sort of cattle and agricultural animals on the land, they needed to flatten it and they used them it for grazing. So a lot of that land was changed from its natural, rich in biodiversity and plant species kind of land. It had been flattened, and an effect of that is when it rained, and some of this is quite hilly terrain, when it rained there was essentially nothing, no trees, no roots, no bushes, no brambles, nothing that would have naturally sort of broken the rain coming down the hill. Nothing that would have sort of rediverted that. And so what was happening was these big pools of water were sort of sitting in basins on the hill and really just affecting the soil and then washing the soil away when it kind of got too full. So all this soil was getting washed away, and if you try and plant there, every new plant was getting washed away. So we were essentially making these natural dams to sort of break up, almost in this sort of zigzaggy way to break up the rainfall as it came down the hill until we could get enough plants growing to then have the plants themselves do the natural job that they should. So that's kind of, and we had to plant some things in swamps, and that's fun. And in fact, because of this experience of, again, it was trying to turn a basin into a wildlife water hole. So this was just like a basin of water, and we were trying to put some things in to bring in the right kind of bugs and then birds, and then just really regenerate that land. And in this particular experience, on this particular day, I got a botfly in my leg. So I don't know if anyone knows what botfly is. Shall I tell you? A botfly is it's a fly that lives on the surface of the water, and if you have any cuts or any sort of broken skin, it will sit on that bit of broken skin and lay its eggs in there, so that when your skin grows back over, and it's a nice little protected pouch for the egg. So you essentially have this parasite, this sort of egg in your leg, and then when it's ready, the egg hatches, and out comes not a fly, out comes a larvae, sort of maggoty thing. So actually, I took a friend home with me from that experience back from South Africa. And that, I don't know if anyone's ever brought an unusual parasite home with them from somewhere abroad, but I actually had to see a tropical doctor and get a bizarre sort of massive plaster thing to put over the top, because obviously if the maggot had come out of the leg and we lost it, you're essentially bringing in alien species, which is the opposite of what I was trying to do. Bringing alien species into this country, you kind of don't want to have, I didn't want to start off a British swarm of botflies, so I had to sort of walk around this weird film on my legs. That was fun. So there's so much fun to be had in rewilding and conservation. But it was a blast, and 18 years old, it was just everything that I needed to kind of open me up to what's going on in the world and what happened. So it was a great experience. I don't know if we're on the internet here, but I was kind of, if we are. No, we're not.
There is internet. I'll have to get the code.
Oh, that's okay. We'll skip that one. But this was just a nice little video. You can imagine it. Here's the picture. Elephants drinking. Very cool. So that's something we got. This is actually, you can see here how without sort of planting up or sort of regenerating that land, it's just absolutely absolute muds, which is great for elephants who want to roll around and have a mud bath, and elephants put wet mud on their skin as sort of a sun cream. So for them it's great, but like just nothing grows here. So you can kind of get elephants, but you can't get anything else. And obviously that's not rich in biodiversity kind of land. So you can kind of see there how you get a swamp without that kind of replanting and that essentially rewilding. And I think doing all that early on really taught me what we're talking about now. When we hear rewilding, things sort of batted around a lot as a buzzword in the news and whatnot. So I came home from this experience completely like in love with everything I'd done, and returning to start university, and just wanting to really sort of record that experience. So I started my blog. So this was the very beginning of, so I actually did that experience in 2008. It took me about 3 years to get around to sorting out the photos. It was a 3-month volunteer experience. I came home with about 8,000 photos. So once I'd spent about 3 years working through photographs, I was ready to start sort of writing about it. And as part of my degree, actually, happily, as part of my degree, we could do a piece of online writing, and I started a blog, and I started writing my blog based upon this experience of being in South Africa. And then, I think it was last year or the year before, I got those really early blog posts printed out and made my own little sort of book. I had it sort of privately printed, and made my own little book of that diary of those experiences. So it's kind of stayed with me and created such an impression that even now it's relevant. And that's when, early on, writing for this blog that I sort of started my degree, that I realised there is such a thing as environmental journalism, and it was not a word that I had known or understood before that. So sort of environmental journalism, just a little bit about what it is. It's about writing about nature, climate, biodiversity, global warming, lobbying governments and trying to put pressure on some of these environmental issues that we sort of want to see new laws and legislation around. It's using the power of the news to bring changes to improve the quality of air and water, wildlife, natural resources, spreading these positive messages of hope, talking to the younger generation. So that's become a really big part of what my career then expanded into, is talking to the children and younger adults about what this whole thing is that's going on, these big words, what's going on in our natural world. And it's inspiring people with stories of conservation so that they can find achievable ways of doing stuff themselves. So that's a big part of my motivation in everything I do, is trying to pass that on and give people achievable, attainable ways of doing things. So, finishing my degree, I got my first break in the industry. I finished my degree in 2013 and had done lots of little bits and pieces and contract work and everything. And then in 2014, I had someone approaching me for a job. I'd actually worked somewhere where a company was then taken over, and they rang me and said, "Do you want to come back in?" And to my absolute luck, astonishment, happiness, joy, it was Discovery Education, which is part of the Discovery Channel. So you can imagine this phone call when my previous boss rang me up and said, "Would you like to come back and do some more, another job?" I'd been on a short-term contract. I said yes. And he said, "We're no longer," it was actually Channel 4 Learning is what it had been. "We're no longer Channel 4 Learning, we've just been bought out by an American company." And so I said, "Is it anyone I know?" And he said, "Do you know Discovery Channel?" "Yeah, I know." So I landed this role at Discovery Channel. So it was a little bit of, yes, it was sort of, there were steps in place, but there's a little bit of luck in there as well. And so I started as a sub-editor at Discovery Education. I was sort of working on news bulletins for school children. I had these new opportunities to sort of blog and do the blogs that I was doing within the scope of Discovery. And obviously you can imagine Shark Week. I was like, yeah, I would love for Shark Week. So that was a really fun experience. And I was just able to sort of communicate my passions, and I was then assigned to working on resources that are very much connected with conservation. I think spend a few minutes with me and I get talking about all these things that I'm really passionate about. It was quite clear early on, I think, to my colleagues that was my area of interest and expertise, and they were, nice enough and sort of forward-thinking enough to sort of think that I could be a big asset to writing that stuff for children. So they assigned me to working on Racing Extinction. So this was a big documentary that came out in 2016, and it is what it says in the tin, Racing Extinction. It was one of these sort of early media productions about what's going on with biodiversity and how we're losing. I think in the UK we've lost 50% of our biodiversity. So, you know, and obviously this was about a global level what's going on with biodiversity. And people often, if they haven't necessarily, they remember or have heard, think they've heard of racing extinction, they often remember a time when the Empire State Building was lit up with these amazing, like, huge pictures of snow leopards and other, you know, endangered species, and they lit up the Vatican, and so they made this really big sort of noise at the time of sort of putting this idea out there of what was happening with this biodiversity loss. And so that was one of the major projects I worked on, and, you know, another seed was planted, I suppose. During all this time, I'm not going to make all these points. I did this for a school. I was talking to a school about, and so I had a lot of bullet points about how my career went. But during this time, I got to, I just carried on. I carried on doing my thing as well. So I was doing all this great stuff with racing extinction, and then I was coming home and writing my blog about it. So I was sort of saying what it was I was doing, what it was I was learning. Obviously, the things I was doing in work was directed at children, so I could kind of write a different spin on everything when I did my blog at home, sort of, at that time I suppose young adults. And things sort of gradually changed over those years between starting that role in 2014. We had a few sort of movements going on. So there was the UN sustainability goals were announced, the Paris Climate Agreement was signed. And you know, as these sort of major things happened, we recognised climate change and biodiversity loss as being a crisis, so they were officially called a crisis by the powers that be. And so things changed, and this direction of like interest sort of rediverted as well, which was, for me, you know, on this personal level, trying to sort of establish my career, it felt like exactly the kind of momentum that I needed. And so my blog grew, and it grew in site traffic, and I got nominated for some awards, and that was fantastic. One of my favourite things I did is I went and did like assemblies. So I did a bit of a racing extinction roadshow, so I went and did some assemblies for children and in schools, sort of talking about these endangered species and just really kind of spreading that word. So that kind of became my passion. And then I got to do some really cool things as well alongside all that for my blog, mainly my blog more so than my work at Discovery, which is kind of going and meeting some of those heroes of mine, you know, some of those people who are out there doing great things in the media and with wildlife. So obviously, like, career highlight, interviewing Sir David Attenborough was just amazing. Doing some work with Chris Packham and Dr. Jane Goodall and these sort of big names. I grew up with a pretty wild show, so Michaela's Dragon was such a cool thing for me. Like, I suppose, like, you know, I sort of tell younger kids about that, and they're like, who? I'm like, no, she's on Springwatch, you know, like, she's someone, you know, Gordon Buchanan and stuff. So I had this really great opportunity to go out there and talk, and like I said, a lot of this came from my blog and doing my own thing, not just sort of sitting in the role at work, but just growing that and chasing those leads. So that was great. And Brian May, who is an amazing sort of speaker and voice for badgers, so that was a really cool moment for me. And on the work front, I got to do stuff as I grew through my career, and actually I swapped over to from Discovery to Nat Geo. I got to actually go out and engage with wildlife, and like I say, you can imagine sort of younger me who really thought that experience at the game reserve was going to be it for me, to kind of go out and do some migration monitoring with sea turtles. And this was a sea turtle hospital in Florida, and the sea turtles were being injured by boats, propellers on boats, and we were sort of trying to be a voice for that and try and get boats to people on boats to behave a bit differently and be aware of the wildlife that were around them. This was Miracle. I don't know if anyone like watches Britain's Got Talent, but Miracle was on there, and I don't know. I didn't watch it. I don't know how talented Miracle was. So I can't vouch for that. But Miracle was really, really cute and was rescued from an awful market from dog meat trade in Yulin. So a big part of what Miracle did was was a miracle, because she was one of the fortunate dogs that was saved from that, and was able again to share those stories. So much of what goes on in my life is about sharing stories. You know, it's not, I would have loved to have been a vet, but I passed out of blood, so that was never going to happen. In fact, some of these, as a journalist, and I'm sort of seeing these things going on with the animals, I was sort of like, okay, tell me what's happening, because I'm just no good at that kind of thing. So for me, it's all storytelling. And then I became a campaigner, because be in the middle of all of this, writing about it, seeing it, caring about it, and then going home and doing nothing. You know, it just never sat well with me. So I got busy and got out at a few of the quite a lot of marches and campaigns, and this was Bird Fair, which is a big event, reaching lots of people. And during all that time, I was actually appointed a trustee for Born Free Foundation. So again, the little 6-year-old me posting my tokens from the toilet paper to then go on and now be a trustee for the charity, became a trustee in 2017. It's just been an amazing experience to kind of move up through that and grow up with this charity and now actually help with steering the direction of what they do. So that's been a huge part of building my identity as much as getting work done. So I consider myself an activist and campaigner. I've done a lot of volunteering on the ground for various conservation organisations as well, and say going around schools and talking as part of Extinction and beyond actually, and just being an enthusiast of rewilding. So this was like the wild zone at Bird Fair, because like I say, we're now bringing that rewilding conversation to the UK, and I kind of feel like I have a little early experience of that. And I cover everything on my blog. I cover climate crisis as well as biodiversity loss. And I've just sort of, I guess, I was finding my beat as a writer up until 2020, because everything changed in 2020, didn't it? So after 3 years of Discovery, I moved on. I missed that as I started in magazines. I missed sort of magazines and doing, you know, what I did early on in my career. So I moved over to National Geographic Kids as a staff writer. Used my experience in educational resources to help them launch a schools resource. I wrote features across their 4 magazines. They have 4 territories, which is the UK, Australia, New Zealand and South Africa. So I was sort of writing to those different audiences in those different countries. Some of this, I think this one's in Afrikaans, so it's really cool. This was actually early on there was a picture of me with a turtle. So this was actually my feature, my first cover feature was all about that story about turtles, and that kind of went in, I'd say, 4 different countries and different languages and stuff, which is really cool. Got to meet Jane Goodall. And one of my press scripts that I didn't really get to write about as much as I would have liked in the magazine in National Geographic was to St. Lucia, and that was the story that I wrote. So the opening story in our book is about being St. Lucia, the bird watching the biodiversity in St. Lucia. So I did that in Nigeria, and it was like I actually got to carry that forward and do something with that in a way that I really wanted in this book. So that was kind of all cool stuff, and this was my favourite piece where I interviewed Dr. Jane. And at the end of 2019, having kind of moved through all this and felt like I've kind of ticked these kind of big boxes in my head. I've done Discovery, I've done Geo, I've done children's education, I've done, going out into schools, I'm busy campaigning, I'm busy, like it was time to sort of, I had a family as well, I had a couple of children, and I was sort of ready to bring all that kind of in as my own brand. And I made the decision at the end of 2019 to go freelance. So in January 2020, I became a full-time blogger and writer and trying to do freelance work. Mainly as well because they weren't allowing working from home from National Geographic at the time, because they said nobody's going to get anything done when they work from home. And then 2 months later, everybody worked from home. So I just kind of missed that. But I backed my decision, like if I'd have known what I know then, I think I'd have still done the same thing, where I became, that became what I do. I became under my own brand, and became conservation was my way forward. And I got the freedom to cover certain things that perhaps you're not able to kind of go there, and certainly children's publications, things like ending wildlife crime and looking at sort of poaching issues and moving, importing wildlife live and carcasses and whatever into the UK and stuff like that. Really kind of getting into the gritty, meaty part of this area of work is kind of what I've been able to do under my own banner. And so I'm busy on Born Free and doing the Marketing and Partnerships Committee. But it was really lonely because I've come from like this kind of busy experience being in lots of big teams and teaming up with people in South Africa and New Zealand and in Australia, and kind of talking to all these across the world, like international teams of people, and being really involved in all of that. And also, like I said, doing press trips and getting out there. It was this really stark change, and obviously what happened a couple of months after becoming this sort of self-employed work at home on my own person, everybody became a sort of work at home on their own kind of person. So that's when I kind of had this idea that I wanted to use all the experience that I had, all the contacts, the network, the industry know-how, to try and put something together where we help each other. So I launched Wildlife Blogger Crowd, which was a community, an online community offering support, including mentoring, sort of publicity and stuff like that for different people who are doing a similar thing to me, trying to get their word out there, trying to talk about wildlife. And we also did like a sister offshoot of that. There's some creatives who are bouncing around that space too, that kind of I felt like if we bring it all together and work together as a team, we might be more effective in amplifying our voice. So I started the Wildlife Blogger Crowd. And now, since I started this in 2020, and here's a couple of more recent examples of actually meeting some of the people who are in that collective of people, which has been great to actually meet them. And so it was established to create a wildlife and nature blog community dedicated to supporting one another, sharing our articles and sharing the information that we hear, because I think in everything, so this is a communications issue, and working together makes everybody stronger, it makes everybody louder. So it's sort of organising those collaborations, asking questions, meeting like-minded friends, helping with career opportunities, and just sort of, being a part of something. And after 10 years of blogging, it's my 10th anniversary of blogging in August, I just kind of felt like I know and understand the power of storytelling so much more. And if I could go back and talk to myself 10 years ago, what would I do different? And how would I how would I use my industry experience to influence that? So that was another part of what I wanted to foster in this community, was helping other people learn some of the lessons that I maybe learned the hard way. And just kind of, this sort of safe space for discussions and all that. So that's how our community started. Out of that, members, people that we were all having conversations, talking on different social media, and people were sort of early rumblings of wanting to be published. Something I kept hearing everywhere is people were saying that they wanted to get a book deal, or they wanted to get published, or they are applying for jobs that they don't have a published credit on their CV. And so that's where I thought, well, let's do it. If we can give those people that opportunity to get that foot through the door, because they can write on their CV that they're published, because they can take a book into a pitching meeting with a book publishers and say, I've already written this and here it is in print, that it would help open doors. So that's really what the whole spirit of this book is about. It's about connecting people, but connecting nature. And I guess I like the idea of putting connections in the title, because a lot of us met through that early connection of literally connecting to the internet, connecting with each other on social media. And so I thought of the digital connections. And then I thought how interesting it was that we were taking that back off of the online space into the real world, and encouraging people to go and step outside. So it was kind of this idea of bringing it all full circle. Obviously, I say 2020 changed everyone's life, and part of, for me, the joy of doing this book was that I couldn't get out there and do those things. I couldn't get out and meet those people, but I could meet them through the writing that they do. So we set up a forum, people submitted their work, and it just became this beautiful process of reading everybody else's stories, remembering everybody else's connections. Which brings us to where we are now. So with, quite a few months of, I don't even want to say hard work, quite a few months of, enjoyment in sort of editing these pieces and speaking to people about those experiences, adapting it out. The book is obviously here and it's out, and it's just something I'm so proud of. And we've used that sort of as well as to help the individuals. We've donated enough money from the book sale, so actually I don't really stand to, I obviously covered the cost of this book, and I don't really stand to make anything back, because that wasn't the point of it. I suppose if I break even on the cost of publishing, then I'm really happy. If I don't, I don't. Because what it really is about is, like I say, more about creating that movement and that network. And so the first sort of bit of profit that we made, I put back into purchasing an acre of land for the World Land Trust. So we were able to do that under our Wildlife Blogger Crowd banner, protect this acre of land in Belize, I believe it is, and there's kind of a little video.
how do you know where you are unless you know where you've come from? People began to notice that individual species of animals and plants, but mostly animals, were becoming rarer and rarer. And a group of naturalists and scientists and administrators got together and started the conservation movement. And the emphasis in those days was very much on species. And the people then said, we must do something about it, very commendably. But what did you do? Well, the initial reaction, believe it or not, was to find the survivors and put them in zoos. Looking back at it now, perhaps it wasn't as sensible as we all thought then. You realized that actually you couldn't just take them from a zoo pen and put them out into the wild world, because they didn't know about the wild world, and they didn't know how to survive. And anyway, people were beginning to get a little more sophisticated about what conservation meant. It wasn't about just one species, however charismatic it might be. It was, to use a word that was surprisingly less familiar than it is today, it was about ecosystems. And they discovered that some species could be conserved in a quite small area, but other species required huge areas. So again, there was a subtle shift. A shift to realize that if you wanted to conserve the world and to conserve the species that were in it, you had to take a big section of land. The conservation was about planet, wild areas of the planet. If you're going to conserve nature, you have to conserve the whole community. And within that community, a strange, powerful animal called Homo sapiens. That, too, had to be thought about and catered for. And it didn't matter whether people on the other side of the earth were simply prepared to give money, if in fact the people themselves, living on these lands, living alongside the creatures that we were so concerned about, weren't aware of what was going on and weren't in sympathy with what was going on. And it was at this point that the World Land Trust, with John Burton, began to formulate important ideas. And so the notion grew that not only would we raise money, the WLT would raise money, but it would also raise expertise to help people with conservation knowledge gleaned from all around the world to solve those conservation problems. But the people, the indigenous people, the local people, were central to all this. WLT now is a major factor in many parts of the world, channeling funds and help and expertise into those areas where they are so badly needed, but leaving the ultimate control in the people who live on that land 365 days of the year. Conservation has been transformed. WLT is at one of the cutting edges of that transformation. If there is one shaft of light and hope in looking ahead at what's going to happen, it is, in my view, that which you see when you see the history of our World Land Trust and the generosity which people who help World Land Trust have helped it to spread its influence worldwide.
So that was what we did with the first amount. So when we had our book launch and we raised our first amount of money from the book launch, we donated to the World Land Trust. And so it's really important to me that everybody who's involved in the book knows that they actually have, just by writing and putting their words out there, done something tangible and measurable in sort of helping to support that And there was also an essence for me about, we're putting, I mean actually I tried to make the book as kind of eco-friendly as possible, which is quite hard to do when you're essentially making a book that you're publishing and printing and putting out there. So we printed it all on FSC certified paper so that we know it's not taking from any kind of natural environment. And we made a few like design decisions to make it sort of as slim as possible. So usually with a book like this, they would do things like every new chapter starts on the right-hand page. And we didn't do that. We kind of made it so that we used as minimal amount of space and paper as possible, just to kind of be conscious about all those decisions that we're making. And that was just important to me. It was important to me if we're going to do something and I'm going to represent the 49 other voices as well as my own in this, that we're doing something that actually fits what our ethos is. I didn't want to do something that takes those people's writing and then does something that they wouldn't be proud to be a part of. So I'm really happy to have made the first steps of kind of partnering with Wildland Trust. And the next, I think, let's escape from this. The next part that we're working on is partnering with a school in Kenya. So actually, oh no, it didn't die me now. No, here we are. So there was a reason why I was particularly like, no. Because we actually had, in the initial sign-up process, so I sort of created this form and had this sign-up process of anyone who's involved in the Wildlife Book Crowd has a chance to write. And we actually had a few people who are in Kenya mainly, but I think there was someone from Malawi as well, but there are people who are based in Africa particularly who were going to write for the book. And when it came to sort of the time scale, they were hit with this huge disproportionate impact of COVID. So a lot of the communities, particularly around the Masai Mara Reserve, which is sort of where I've made quite a few connections with Wildlife Book Crowd, they'd already suffered in January 2020 from bad flooding, which is a direct impact of climate change. They'd had more severe flooding than they'd ever had. And they were going through sort of a food crisis, and that was part of what they were going to, a couple of these people who were involved, Jack Nicholson is one of them, what they were going to do is going to talk about that and talk about connection with nature, and we really live alongside the wildlife, and we actually are in those rural communities where some of the things that I might go and enjoy looking at or writing about or whatever actually impacts their life. So they were going to represent that side of the story. But then COVID hit and their whole landscape changed, and the whole, what they were doing with tourism, obviously tourism completely shut off, so their livelihood stopped. And it just obviously wasn't a priority for them at that point to sit and write for my book. Like it was to survive. And so their voices then weren't represented in the way I would have really wanted to, because we had print deadlines and stuff that I had to just go ahead and do it. So I didn't get to have those voices represented. And that was something that made me really sad, because that was the whole point of what this book is about, is it's including all those voices and bringing all those stories together. So I wanted to kind of tell those stories. If they're not in the book, then they need to be somewhere. And which is why I was really glad when the laptop wasn't going to work, because I know I don't lose them. So we're working with Jack in particular, who he is a Maasai warrior, and his Maasai name is the Wise Man. He goes and he helps schools. So he started the food relief program, and now he's working with lots of different schools. And he works with an organisation called $1 Million Vegan, where they take vegan food out to these schools and essentially feed the children, give them bundles for their family as well. Members of the Maasai community come along and can collect big bundles of food, and he helps kind of provide that food relief. And I was sort of talking with him about what we should do now to collaborate. And we actually got a program where I'm sending, people can on our website, wildlifebookcrowd.com, they can actually donate, buy a book to donate to go out to be sent to the school, and we're raising some money, some towards the food relief program, and some also towards, thankfully $1 Million Vegan kind of have a lot of that covered. So we're doing some stuff like educational materials and kind of telling them our stories. That was kind of what was quite nice about doing this thing, where I'm sending some books out to particularly this school, is the main one we're working with at first, was to give them our side of, because a lot of these, there's a couple of people in America represented and a little bit further afield, most of it is UK based. So to give them a sense of like what animals do we see and how do we interact with them, it's kind of quite nice. And yeah, so we're kind of partnering with them. That's what the tombola is over there today. So I'm just trying to like raise a little bit extra money. There'll be a break in a little while if you want to do, you know, we just kind of do some things to kind of help. You know, I'm sending out a big box of stuff for them at Christmas time. And so if you don't feel guilty yet. And so we're sending out a whole bunch of stuff for them at Christmas time to support this shipment of books and stuff. So that's really nice to kind of be able to still work with them in some way or another. And I guess I just wanted to show Jack's story.
Hello, my name is Jack, and I'm the community aid worker and the director of the $1 million Fair Grants food relief efforts here in Kenya. Since the beginning of this pandemic, the Masai Mara people of Kenya has been struggling to survive without tourists coming to their region, and now many families do not have food. The situation is critical, and I fear hunger and starvation will even kill more people compared to COVID-19. $1 Million Fair Grant has kindly donated 50,000 meals for us. I'm calling upon all of us, and even as an international, so that we can come together and help our people during this COVID-19 season. It is very sad that the COVID-19 is still increasing very rapidly, and the Maasai people are the most people who are taking care of the wildlife and the stakeholders of the most iconic wildlife in Africa, including the elephants, the lions, the leopards, and the buffaloes, the giraffes. We host the big five, the small five, the shy five, and this is the most sensitive area, especially in East Africa, whereby the Maasai indigenous communities are taking care of this wildlife, both in the Masai Mara National Reserve and also the Masai Mara Conservancies. And we do not wish these people to turn back to poaching habits, or maybe participate in the charcoal burning businesses, which might lead to the destruction of the Masai Mara beautiful natural forest.
The worry is obviously as they continue to sort of struggle with both the impacts of COVID and the impacts of climate change, there's more risk of families who are desperate for food turning and poaching wildlife for food in desperation, or illegally taking, so there's a whole charcoal industry around the forests around there, and people are kind of put into poaching and taking not just wildlife but wood, and the environment that is there is very fragile. So yes, and obviously we've just had recently that parts of Africa are back on the red list. So it kind of is a hard time right now. And I'm hoping if there ever is a chance to do a second book, which I don't know if there will be or how that's going to go, that we get more of those voices represented, and it might be a happier time for them. But yeah, so these are the kind of people who are in the wildlife law crowd, not just sort of myself and perhaps some people from down the road, but we're really trying to represent and amplify all those voices, and if we can put them in a space where we are and we have opportunity to sort of be here and talk to everybody and tell our stories, and I kind of want to bring them with us. Which is kind of a nice time for me to take a little break now, maybe like 5-10 minutes to just maybe have a drink, use the loo, do anything, you know, just and have a bit of a chat. We'll have like 5 minutes or so. And we're going to hear some more stories after that from people who've actually written for the book, telling their own stories from why and how they've written. So I think I've done talking about me now.
I'm not using technology because it crashes on me. But don't worry, the pages are numbered, and yes, I have been to Pelican. Right. I'm going to tell you all about how this came about, why I wrote this piece, and a little bit about Thetford in years gone by. Because Thetford, when I grew up, was a very, very different place than the one you walk around today, and it wasn't quite so wet. So it's lovely to be able to have had this opportunity to revisit all my childhood memories for this book. Even more so as it was my daughter compiling it. So Thetford from my childhood memories was very different to the one we live in today. It was much smaller, there were fewer houses, no factories, one small primary school, which you probably remember with me. There was a grammar school, and there was a small secondary boarding school. But there was one street of shops, which was called King Street. There were no buses, few cars, lots of churches and pubs in the town. The quiet roads meant that it was safe for children to wander and play. We'd go to the park or one of the several sweet shops that had a vast choice of penny sweets, chews and licorice, and our parents never had to worry about where we were or if we were safe. Everyone knew each other, and the families living in the town very rarely locked their doors. People looked out for each other, which was very good, but could be quite annoying as a child because you had to behave and you had to be careful because everyone knew your parents and they would soon hear if you'd been up to something you shouldn't be, so you had to behave. The town was surrounded by farms, fields, hedgerows, heaths, grassland and forestry, so wildlife was in abundance, including mice in your home and very huge spiders that would come in from the fields. My memories of walking down to Kilverstowe, which is a little cluster of houses outside of Thetford, which is almost now part of Thetford, was each week to my granddad's and uncle's graves. It's very clear and detailed to me as a child because outings and holidays were very rare. People couldn't afford them on the wages that they had, despite working long hours and physical work. Holidays and days out were spent visiting family and chatting, which was never very exciting when you were a child. So it was exciting to leave your house and walk out to see what you could find. The journey for me, as part of writing this, was to remember the long walk through town, which was a long way from where we lived. I was a small child. Through the streets and roads before heading out of the town through a cluster of houses in Redgate and Green Lane to the countryside beyond. Anybody that lives in Thetford, you won't know that way at all now because it's now the main road from Norwich Road roundabout to this roundabout. But in my childhood days, it was a rail line. You had to cross it over some wooden plats across the track. No lights, no barriers, nothing like that. The railway ran from Thetford station in town to a second station in town called Bridge Station. This was the beginning of Arlington Way today, or the Bridge Tavern, which was later known as Zack's, the American diner. As I said, there were no barriers or lights, so you had to look both ways, you had to listen, and you had to cross quite quickly. My brother and I always ran and squealed, "Made it!" when we crossed the other side of the railway line. When we had to wait for a train, it was equally thrilling. and she waved to the passengers heading to Bury St Edmunds, just like in the Railway Children. We entered Green Lane, a very overgrown lane with bushes, trees, ditches and plenty of stinging nettles. Rabbits and hares would dart through the undergrowth, as well as numerous birds in the hedgerows and trees. The bird song was varied and loud, and we would go quietly, hoping to see lots of different things. There was never anyone in the lane. Now it's in the middle of a housing estate leading to Tesco supermarket. Hardly a lane at all. At the end of the lane were two semi-detached flint and stone cottages. They're still there, and they're visible from Thetford Garden Centre car park. The cottage on the right, nearest to the road, was where my dad lived with his parents, his brothers and sisters. We always stopped here for some Smarties from my dad's pocket to look at the garden and the cottage. I now know it's because my dad was remembering his parents, who had by then passed away. There's a photograph of my dad, aged 17 years, leaning on the gate in his RAF uniform in 1939 as war broke out. He signed up as a rear gunner in Lancaster bombers and many other aeroplanes, including large American Liberator bombers. His mother waved him off on her own, as his dad had already passed away by then, and later waved her other son into the Royal Navy. As a child, I had no idea what passed through his mind as we headed down to his father's and brother's grave in Kilverstone Church. Kilverstone was not a village, just a cluster of houses, a church and a great hall where Lord and Lady Fisher lived. Lord Fisher was a descendant of Vavasour Fisher, Admiral of the Fleet. The hall was an impressive building, and the grounds were stunning. They were filled with peacocks and golden pheasants. They were roaming free. Now the garden is no longer stunning. The wall is crumbling, and the estate is divided into many rented properties, and peacocks roam there no more. Here's a picture of my brother and I down a very wild lane, with lots of stinging nettles. And there's the picture of my cottage where my father grew up, just at the end of the lane. At the entrance to the church, as we went down to the church, was the kissing gate and seats. This is where my mum and dad used to date in their teenage years until war separated them. They were both members of the Salvation Army and had been since they were both in Sunday school. During the war, Dad signed up and Mum was called up, aged 17 years, to the de Havilland factory in Hatfield to work on a grinding machine for 13-hour shifts and then an hour's walk to her billet. It was bizarre because my daughter Katie attended the University of Hertfordshire on the site of the de Havilland factory, which her grandmother had been posted to all those years before, and the Spitfire is still there. My mum lived at Welwyn Garden City during the war years. Katie took her on a day trip there by train to visit the area several years ago, before she was too frail to travel, which often did, but much had changed. She is still with us, aged 99 years, with an amazing memory, which you can see from Katie's book, which she's also contributed with her own memories. My parents were married during the war in 1943 at St Peter's Church in Thetford, with no idea what the future held for them. As my brother and I skipped down the grassy track to the church, we had no idea of our parents' past. My mum always produced a picnic on the seats in the kissing gate. We had no idea the significance of the walk to the graves for our parents. The mere fact that Dad returned from the war and they had a family of 4 children was enough for both of them. They enjoyed the simple life. They worked hard, had little money, few possessions, never owned a car, but they enjoyed each day. They both loved nature and never took for granted the freedom to roam freely and safely in the countryside with the people they loved. Lockdown has reminded many of us caught up in our daily work, busy lifestyles and the madness of gathering goodies and chasing the next goal or possession, that time and people are precious. It has led many of us to reconnect with nature, to slow down and look around at the beauty that surrounds us and the peace it brings us. And there's a picture of the kissing gate. you. And that's why I wrote that little part.
So as my mum says, my nan actually wrote a piece for the book. She's not technically a blogger, but I thought I'd let her on. In fact, so she wrote a piece about that transition from being in the countryside in Thetford at that time, at the breakout of war, and going to Welwyn Garden City, and how this sort of concept of like, this is a garden city that's putting nature back into cities and larger towns. How bizarre that was for her, for someone who actually grew up in true countryside, to sort of see this almost like feeble attempt of, if we sort of plant some flowers down here and make a bit of a hedge here, that's somehow similar to what she's known or been used to. So it was really interesting kind of getting her take on the change in society and how that then affects sort of our connections with nature. And actually, it would have been really lovely to have her here today, but she's 99 and she couldn't quite make the stairs. And even with writing the piece that we put together for the book, actually she can't write because her hands shake too much and she can't see. So we actually did it as an interview, and I interviewed her and turned those sort of recordings into a story for the book. And it was just the most bizarre thing, sort of listening to her memories of there were no roads here and there was only horses, and occasionally Charlesborough steam engines would come through. And I'm recording it all on my phone to go home and sort of type it up, and it was just this bizarre thing. And to have that kind of story, that was really important to me, to have that story of voices from a generation that soon won't be here and a part of it. It's just really nice to put that in the book. And when I took the book round to her when it was completed, and she read it under her many magnifying glasses right next to each other. She had a little book. One of the things that she picked out is mainly she was looking for pictures, and she picked out our youngest contributor in the book is a 6-year-old Benjamin, who does drawings and a little bit of photography, but mainly drawings of nature. And he did a story with his mum about finding an owl feather. And that was the story that she picked out, and she looked at the picture of the feather and she said, oh yeah, I remember doing that when I was a little girl, picking up the feathers and sketching them. And I just thought how amazing that there's 93 years between her and this little boy. The way that they're engaging with nature is still the same. I find that so powerful. This idea that just an owl feather can inspire sort of creativity and connecting and enjoying the wildlife around us. And it doesn't matter how much technology or time or experience has passed between us. Those small sort of treasures in nature evoke the same thing. So it's really important to me to have her in there too.
I'm Rachael. I write Wild Barley, which some people might know. My social media kind of wildlife blog. I've written that actually 9 years, it'll be 10 years in March next year, but the first couple of stories were about stuff that happened in 2011. The piece that I wrote for the book was very much about, initially started with my connection with nature. That started with whales and dolphins when I was 5 years old, and I saw a dolphin. It was actually in captivity, which has then led me on this path of wildlife, mainly, as I said, whales and dolphins, through university experience, working as a guide on whale watch boats, surveying on ferries and cruise ships, all the way around the world really, travelling as well. And when I was 5, I decided I wanted to work with whales and dolphins. That's the bit in the book, that was what I wanted to do, which at the time, there were quite a few people that were interested in wildlife and nature in my school and growing up, but no one really wanted to work with whales and dolphins. Even when I got to uni, I didn't go to a kind of traditional marine mammal university. I went to Aberystwyth, which has a strong marine theme, but not really. Marine mammals, you need to go maybe to Bangor or Aberdeen, places like that. But yeah, I was really determined I wanted to do this. I'm pretty sure I can say I have. I'm now a marine mammal consultant, working for a company that provides advice to offshore industries, so seismic surveys for oil and gas, installation of wind farms, things like this that have an impact on marine mammals, particularly their hearing. And I provide advice on how you mitigate that and prevent, mainly prevent injury, but also disturbance, things like this. So that was me, I'm 30 odd years later, and I am that 6-year-old, 5-6-year-old working with whales and dolphins. I don't get out as much on the boat as much as I'd like maybe anymore, But I do make sure I go and get I call it my blubber fix, and I have to have my blubber fix every year. And it's quite hard living in Thetford. There's not that many marine mammals here, even when it does flood in the river. But saying that, I've gone up to the coast so many times. I see harbour porpoise pretty much every time I go up there. All your Potter fans, the harbour porpoise is my Patronus, just so you get that out there. I've also seen a humpback whale from the Norfolk coast, so there are things there, but I travel all over trying to, as I said, get my fix. And then, so that was really my kind of connection, but what happened with the story is that it then evolved to my children, and I became a mum in 2015, and a lot of my friends at the time that were having children were kind of dropping away from the marine mammal thing, but also I'm a trained bird ringer, so I go out and I catch birds, and I put metal rings on them in order to track where they go. That was something that really happened when I met my husband, actually. I was very much marine mammals, and he's very much into birds, and we kind of shared that passion. I got him interested in marine mammals, he got me interested in birds. As I said, I became this ringer, so I go out and catch the birds and ring them in order to track where they go. And when I had my daughter, a lot of my friends, they weren't going out anymore. Bird ringing is not the easiest thing to take a baby with, particularly if you're going out early mornings, cold weather. In the summer, it can be really early mornings. And I'm not going to say, oh yeah, I go out every time with her and I drag her along everywhere. Things did change, but I still did it. She was 3 weeks old when I first took her ringing, and she's done it pretty much ever since. She likes climbing ladders in the forest. I just have to look the other way sometimes. She loves the swans that you see in Thetford as well if you go along. If you see any with colourings on, that's us, me and my husband, and my daughter in particular loves helping to catch the swans. So yeah, really kind of just took her along as much as I could. It wasn't the same. I did do things differently and didn't do as much, but I tried to install that kind of connection with nature that I have as much as possible with her. In 2020, just before I wrote this, I became a mum again, so the experience with my son has been very, very different than it was with my daughter, obviously, being essentially a lockdown baby. But it's the same. We take him out, we go ringing with him, with both of them. There have been times when I've been sat with two very cold children on my lap, screaming at me, going, what am I doing? Why am I here? Why am I putting them through this? And all I have to do is remember what they look like, what their faces look like, how they react when they see a bird. Toby is almost 2 now. He can't speak very well, he says "dar" a lot, and I did think his first word was going to be duck. And then he said the same sound to a car, to a tree, to the sky, to me. So I'm like, okay, right, that's not duck, but anyway. But he loves it. His face lights up when he sees birds. His face lights up when he sees cars as well, but they light up when he sees birds. There's some lovely photos. I'm really chuffed that the photos of them got included in the book. He's in there looking at, I think he's looking at a brambling, and Robin is letting a kingfisher go. I mean, how many 5-year-olds have even seen a kingfisher, let alone had one in the hand to let it go? And they've got lots of interests, but they really do have a connection already with nature. And I really hope moving forward that they can develop that, whether they go on to work, I don't know, doing what I do, doing what my husband does, it doesn't matter. Robin at the moment wants to be a child ringer. Sounds a bit dodgy. she means a bird ringer or a horse rider. So yeah, as I said, she can be whatever she wants, but I'm just happy that she's got that kind of connection with nature, whether it's directly herself or whether it's through her parents. I'm happy because, like the title said on mine, is that you protect what you love, and if my kids love nature, they're more likely to protect it, and that's my biggest gift to them, will be protecting what they love.
So another of our contributors who has a voice represented in the book, and I'm so happy to have you here today as well to speak.
Thank you. Yes, so my name's Berenice Tregenna, and you might notice that actually it's called Berry Tree, my blog, I just thought, well, it sounded like nature, and I just took parts of my name and stuck it together. Some people don't notice that, but I always point it out. So, yeah, I thought I'd start with just the first bit of what I wrote. It's called Nature Spotting. I notice nature and feel connected to it wherever I am. I often find it in unlikely places, and that is because I am a nature spotter. Some see weeds, I see insect cafe. I thought of this quote when I saw a line of dandelions at the end of my drive. There are so many plants that are seen as weeds, which are vital to insects. The need to speak up for common plants and insects prompted me to start my blog called Berry Tree. So my blog concentrates then on like insects and plants, and I'll just show you quickly one of the pictures I took. Now actually I took that on a mobile phone, so don't think that if you go out into nature that you need the latest camera. You can actually take really good photographs on a mobile. There's like a macro ability on my mobile, so quite lucky there. And I bet some people might think that's a wasp, but actually it's a hoverfly. So what it is, in the lockdown I got inspired because I've always been into nature, and my husband has come with me on many trips around all the nature reserves, and I've done lots of bird watching as well. And I've always been into it, but I've never been into it as much as the lockdown. So when the lockdown happened, I went out into my garden, which you couldn't really go very far, with my mobile, and I spent hours looking at things like the ivy, the nettles and things. And as you can see, if you get up close, you can find out things, because I would have thought, even just a year ago, or a couple of years ago, that was a wasp, but it's a hoverfly. And you can see it's got 2 wings, a wasp's got four wings, and it's got much bigger eyes than a wasp. Okay, and it won't sting you. But wasps are good at pollinating as well, so that's one of our pollinators. And moving on, so when we were in the lockdown, we didn't realise that there's this lovely place we could go to just behind this road. So there's actually an alleyway, and we didn't even know it existed. We'd lived there 10 years, so we're near Colchester in Essex, and so we kind of like went round this alleyway, and there was this big sort of grassland area and a lake, and it was absolutely beautiful. And I just went along the muddy path and I saw this, and I know some people might be thinking someone's thrown some Cheerios on the leaf, but actually, funnily enough, these are called spangle. These are from the spangle gall wasp. They're called galls, spangle galls, and it's a tiny little wasp that puts they put their eggs on the leaf, the back of the oak leaf, and the larvae actually sit on the leaf, and so they basically grow a plant growth. So some of the plant tissue grows around them, and actually they're called silk buttons because they look a bit like some threads gone round and that kind of thing. So yeah, that is actually from a tiny little wasp, and they do it in the autumn, and it comes out as an adult in April and the spring. So, it's funny what you can find just on the floor that you probably would normally pass by and forget about. So that we found that around the back of our secret area. And now, this is something, so not just going around the back of the alleyway, I was just walking along the street one day, and suddenly saw this on the yellow line. And my husband was like, "What are you doing?" I'm standing there. This yellow line from my mobile phone, there's people walking past thinking, "What's she doing?" And I actually sort of suddenly saw a cream spot, a sort of tiger moth sitting there. And I thought, well, they're not going to get a ticket, so they're okay. But yeah, I managed to find one, so I was really pleased with that, really. So even in the streets, you can see wildlife, and what I'd like to say is that anywhere, I think absolutely anywhere, I've seen pavement plants, you could just see anything out in the street as well. So I'm trying to encourage people to do more nature spotting, because I think the more you notice what you're seeing like that, the more you want to look after it. And I think it's really important to go out and look at nature, but also maybe to think about in your gardens as well, to have a little wild patch area, because on my blog I've written about nettles and dandelions as well as ivy. And I think if you just leave these things in your garden, even if it's just a small area, you'll have a wealth of wildlife in there. So that's what I'm trying to do, get more people out there spotting nature and sort of growing a wild patch in their gardens. So another thing I found with nature, and this has happened in the lockdown, is I've actually got fibromyalgia, which is like a painful condition. And I found that actually focusing on nature and my blog, it actually took away some of the pain. And it helps with anxiety as well, which I also have. So I just see nature as a medicine. So we can help nature, but nature can also help us. So it's like a two-way relationship. So I just wanted to finish with my last paragraph in my bit. The next time you go for a walk in the streets where you live, look out for the birds flitting about, the flowers in the pavement cracks, and the trees waving in the wind. You might be surprised about how happy this natural connection makes you feel. So thank you.
Hey, it's Steve Wood, the Backyard Zoologist, and I am Chapter 18 in Connections with Nature. I want to thank Kate for including me in this project. It's really, really awesome. I have an Instagram page and a Facebook page called The Backyard Zoologist where I'm cataloging local wildlife. I live in an area called Tully, New York, which is about 15 minutes south of Syracuse. As you can see, it's very rural, it's mountainous, lots of forests. And I've been cataloging all the things that live around me on Instagram and educating the community about them. And someone had said to me, I really like what you're doing with backyard conservation. And I thought, well, that's a new topic to me. I never thought about that. But I thought, how can we do this? What is backyard conservation and how can I participate in that? Now, I worked in communicable disease for years and years and years, particularly around HIV and substance use and things like that. And we have a methodology called harm reduction, which is the one thing you can do to protect yourself is better than doing nothing at all. So out of the next 10 times you partake in risky behavior, try once to not put yourself at risk and then work your way up to being less risky. And I thought we can apply that methodology to conservation, and I can apply it right here in my backyard. So clean the space up. I keep 1 acre in use where we have a yard, gardens, me and the pups run around and have a great time. But the other 5 acres that I have, I leave wild. I let the trees grow up, the bushes grow up, and things like that. I do composting. I do gardens of native plants, which I think is very important. You want to research what your native plants are in your area and encourage their growth, because that's what your local pollinators utilize, and then everything else that utilizes the pollinators for food are going to be coming in as well. But we can use that harm reduction methodology to increase the health of the planet, just as we did back in communicable disease to increase the health of the community. So I would love it if you would follow along with me on Instagram or on Facebook. It's The Backyard Zoologist, and pick up a copy of this book because it's awesome and there's some great stuff in there. And thank you very much.
I haven't really mentioned the foreword and the epilogue in the book, and it's probably something maybe I should be talking about a lot more. But we were fortunate enough to have some people who are more well-known names kind of contribute to the book. But I guess the reason I haven't shouted about that so much is I didn't want that to be like the main focus, because to me every single voice in this book is equal. Every single person who's contributed, everyone's experience with nature, everyone from the different parts of the world and however they experience is equal and has an equal place in this. And so that was kind of the important thing. But we did have, the foreword is written by Jonathan Scott, who is a sort of BBC One nature presenter. He did the Big Cat Diaries on BBC One and Big Cat Tales on, I think that's on Discovery, actually. I think it's Discovery, Big Cat Tales. And so he's obviously a well-known filmmaker, and Big Cat Diaries was a big influence on me growing up. And the epilogue is written by Virginia McKenna, who is the founder of the Born Free Foundation. Obviously, I mentioned that as being a big part of my story in nature. And Virginia is herself, she turned 90 this year, and so it was kind of nice to get something penned by her in her 90th year. And she actually wrote this piece around the time of her birthday, when she was celebrating her 90th birthday in Scotland. She sort of read the book and read everyone's contribution and sort of wrote her piece from there. And I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I just, from what we were talking about and saying just then, it sort of it seems so fitting to not share it. So she sort of concludes with, in this fascinating and very personal book, many of the writers have given us a glimpse of their inner beliefs, their views on those who exploit and disrespect animals, their joy as they watch insects busily exploring the verges of roads, or seabirds swooping over the ocean. Maybe what struck me most of all was the realization of the gratitude that so many of the authors felt towards wild creatures and wild places. Is this the other side of the COVID coin? We had time during lockdown to watch and listen to the sights and sounds of the natural world, and as we have rediscovered its half-forgotten fascination and the joy that it can bring, will we learn, change, and assure a future for wildlife of the world, for our children and for the animals themselves? It's one of the greatest hopes of my life. And I just felt that fitted so well in what everyone was saying, that this really has become a story that all of us are connected with through sort of that separation from all of the other technologies and busyness of life to kind of get back to the sort of roots of it all. So I'd like, not that one. So I'd like Nick to come in, if you're happy to, come and do another song for us. And this is the second set of lyrics that's included in the book.
Something on the telly made you cry. I don't even think I'd like to know. Is it all about your fantasies? Or lying on a bed under shining trees? Oh, it's so crazy that beauty can look that way. Emotion comes out when the news kicks in. And if you let me call back the joy that you fought so hard to win, back to the shining trees, back to the shining trees. Something in the music made you dance, dance like a child of grace. You can walk away, it's okay. You can fly away, fly away. Ah, but it's so crazy that beauty can look that way. Oh, and the emotion comes out when that news kicks in. And if you let me call back the joy that you fought so hard to win, back to the shining trees, back to the shining trees, back to the shining trees.
When I started doing a blog many years ago, and prior to that, writing my pieces as a 14-year-old in the sort of local magazines and whatnot, I had no idea if there was any staying power. In fact, I remember starting my blog as part of my university course, and everyone had to pick a topic to write something about online, and I said it was going to be about conservation. And I think at that time people didn't necessarily even know what conservation meant, because my lecturer actually asked me, are you sure you're going to be able to sustain that for the whole term? And then here we are 10 years later, and it's more relevant than ever. So sort of believing in that niche as a writer. Also, I kind of put build your own success. So we live in the age where everyone has the opportunity to either publish their work or do something. It's not about just writing. Do something, storytell, photography, leading forest schools, talking in public to people about these issues. That we live in an age where we all have a platform, and I encourage everyone to kind of use that space, use that platform, do what you can. If there are things like, you know, communities, stuff like the Wildlife Blog Crowd, where you feel like that might be inspirational, or it might be a way to meet people, or sort of tell each other stories and whatnot, like just jump in and get involved. Because like I say, for me, the blog has been the key to unlocking my career path, but it's also been the key to unlocking, you know, the people that I spend my time with, the friends I have, the way I spend my free time, you know, sort of getting involved in a passion, and particularly something like wildlife that needs us as much, and nature that needs us as much as we need that, is so deeply encouraged. And then the other takeaway is there's a little goodie bag here for everyone who came that's filled with some stuff like, you know, bird ID guides, some bird seeds, and ways to kind of connect with nature, some ideas for having like an eco-Christmas and whatnot. And I just hope that everyone takes one of those home, has a look through, and doesn't end the sort of the conversation and the experience and hopefully the inspiration from the book and whatnot. Just don't leave it there, like go that step further. So please do come and take a goodie bag, and just thank you everyone for giving your time to hear us and hear about the book. So thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity to use this space, and for stocking our book, you know, which means so much. To get it out there, it's one thing getting it published, to get it out there is actually really hard. So, thank you.